Good morning. Grab your coffee and lean in, because we need to talk about a $2 trillion secret that's sitting right in your backyard. You know that local business down the street, the one that's been expanding, hiring, and looks like the picture of health? Well, here's the thing. Its mortgage isn't held by the bank on the corner anymore. It's held by an invisible entity, a ghost in the machine. And that ghost is part of a massive $2 trillion shadow system that's quietly swallowed the global credit market while we were all looking the other way. It's called private credit. A decade ago, this was a niche corner of the financial world for the ultra-wealthy. Today, it's the engine of the global economy. Since the 2008 crash, traditional banks have been forced to play it safe, pulling back from lending to middle-market companies. But that money didn't just disappear. It migrated. It moved into an unregulated shadow market that operates without the safety nets, the transparency, or the government backstops we've relied on for nearly 20 years. We're talking about a market that's grown to over $2.1 trillion. That's a staggering jump, and it's happening in the dark. To understand why this matters to your bank account, we need to look under the hood at the engine driving this growth, because honestly, what I found there is wild. Okay, let's get into the mechanics of this, but I want to keep it moving. Think of private credit as a credit vacuum. When the big banks retreated due to those heavy Basel III regulations, these private funds rushed in to fill the void. It seemed like a win-win. Companies got their cash, and lenders got high returns. But there's a catch, and it's a big one. These loans are floating. They aren't locked in at the low rates we saw a few years ago. They're linked to something called SOFR. When the Fed hiked rates from 0 to 5%, the interest costs for these businesses didn't just go up. They doubled. Now, here's where the math gets really tricky. When a company can't afford its interest payments, you'd expect it to default, right? Not in the shadow market. Instead, they're using something called PA interest, payment in kind. Think of it as an IOU for interest. Instead of paying cash, the borrower just adds the interest they owe back onto the principal of the loan. It's like paying for your mortgage by taking out another mortgage every single month. It keeps the lights on, and it makes the company look healthy on paper, but the debt mountain just keeps growing. Current data suggests that between 9 and 15% of all private loans are now non-cash interest. That's a lot of IOUs floating around. And here's the number that blew me away when I first saw it. The IMF reports that 40% of these borrowers are now facing negative free cash flow. That means for every 4 companies that took these shadow loans, nearly 2 of them are effectively underwater. They're spending more on interest than they're bringing in, but because of those PIK IOUs, they don't show up on the official default lists. This number, 40% of borrowers holding their breath, means one thing. The system is essentially running on borrowed time. But who provided the oxygen to keep this fire burning? Let's talk about the real problem. This isn't just a story about some distant corporate lenders. It's about you. See, those private credit funds needed capital, and they found it in the one place that's always looking for a safe yield. Pension funds, we're talking about teachers in Texas and firefighters in Louisiana. Their retirement contributions have been flooded into private credit to meet those tough annual targets. In some cases, pension allocations to these shadow assets have jumped by 400 basis points. They're escaping 0% bond yields, but they're walking straight into a liquidity trap. Trace the dollar with me. A teacher's retirement contribution goes to a pension fund. That fund, desperate for an 8% return, gives it to a private credit firm. That firm lends it to a high-risk corporate borrower at a floating rate. Now, that borrower is struggling because rates are at 5%. They start using those PIK IOUs. The pension fund thinks they're earning interest, but there's no actual cash flowing back. It's all just accounting entries on a balance sheet. If that borrower eventually hits a wall, that teacher's retirement isn't just at risk, it's already been effectively liquidated into a bad loan. And it doesn't stop there. The interconnectedness is what makes this a systemic nightmare. Traditional banks, the ones we think are safe, have over $4.5 trillion in exposure to these non-bank financial institutions. That exceeds the core Tier 1 capital for multiple regions in the US and Europe. If the shadow falls, the real banks are standing right underneath it. It's a global web of dependencies where every strand is pulled tight. We've seen this movie before, but this time, the script has a dangerous twist. So is this 2008 all over again? Well, if we look back at the 1998 collapse of long-term capital management, the similarity index is about 85%. But there's a key difference. Back in '98, It was one giant liquid fund. The Fed could broker a deal between banks to fix it. Today, the risk is dispersed across thousands of illiquid, opaque contracts. You can't just bail out 1,000 secret deals with a phone call. The secondary market is already starting to react, with some investors trying to exit their positions at a 15% discount. They're willing to lose 15 cents on the dollar just to get out. Now, let that land. The experts are at war over this. You've got Larry Fink at BlackRock arguing that this is just a structural shift, a better way to provide essential capital to the economy. He sees a bridge. On the other side, you've got Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan warning that there's hell to pay once a real recession hits. He sees a cliff. The official headline default rate is sitting at a comfortable 2.1%. Sounds fine, right? But the reality, the selective distress rate is actually closer to 5%. That gap between what is reported and what is real is where the danger lives. The bull case says these private lenders are better at managing risk because they have direct access to the companies they lend to. They can restructure before the crash. The bear case says you can't restructure your way out of a math problem when the cash simply isn't there. Honestly, I think both sides are right about different things, but transparency is the missing ingredient here. In a public market, you can see the cracks forming. In a shadow market, you only know there's a problem when the floor disappears. The gap between the story and the data is where the secondary market has already started to exit.
Where do we go from here? The trajectory is clear. Moody's projects this market will hit $3.5 trillion by 2028. It's not slowing down, it's accelerating. But the first wave of exits is already happening. We're seeing the retailization of these assets, where these complex illiquid loans are being packaged and sold to regular investors as income vehicles. This is the final frontier of risk.
When they start selling the shadow to the public, that's usually when the lights are about to come on. Here's the deal. You need to monitor your exposure. If you've got a pension or a managed 401(k), look at your alternative or private credit allocations. This trap only works if you stay in the dark. But once you see the mechanics, you can start asking the right questions. The shadow market provided the fuel for the last decade of growth, but as rates stay higher for longer, that fuel is becoming incredibly volatile.
Think about that next time you look at your retirement statement.
In the world of finance, light is the only thing that shrinks a shadow. And it's time we turned the high beams on your retirement's future. The math is starting to stop working, and when the math stops working, we all need to be paying attention. Stay sharp, watch the data, and I'll see you tomorrow.